Autumn painted Willow Creek in shades of amber and gold, the aspens on surrounding hillsides shimmering like coins caught in sunlight. 1 year had passed since Eleanor first stood before the town council, clutching her medical diploma. The anniversary hadn't escaped her notice, though she'd had little time to contemplate it. Flynn's recovery from the knife wound had become a turning point for the town. With Jackson mediating, the railroad company improved working conditions, while local businesses, led by the clinic, adopted policies serving all residents regardless of origin. Tensions eased as prosperity spread more evenly through the growing community. On this crisp October morning, Eleanor surveyed the clinic from its front porch, pride warming her despite the seasonal chill. The building stood as tangible proof of how far she'd come, not just professionally, but in winning acceptance from a community that had initially rejected her. "Quite a legacy already," remarked Mary, joining her with steaming coffee cups. Over the months, the miner's wife had transformed from volunteer assistant to paid nurse, her natural talents honed through Eleanor's patient teaching. "Hardly a legacy," Eleanor demurred, accepting the coffee gratefully. "We've only just begun." Mary's knowing smile suggested she meant more than just the clinic's physical structure. The town's buzzing about the hospital expansion, 20 beds, a dedicated children's ward. "Nothing's finalized," Eleanor cautioned, though the plans spread across her desk told a different story. Jackson's architects had drawn preliminary designs for an addition that would make Willow Creek Medical Center the most advanced facility in 3 territories. "Speaking of things not yet finalized," Mary continued with the directness that had become her hallmark, "the whole town's wondering when you and Mr. Callahan will make an announcement." Eleanor nearly choked on her coffee. "Mary!" "Don't marry me." The nurse's eyes danced with amusement. "A blind man could see what's between you two, yet here we are, seasons changing, and neither of you speaking plain." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, a rider approached at a gallop, dust rising behind him. Her heart quickened with familiar anticipation. A medical emergency, a chance to practice the skills that defined her. Instead, the messenger extended a sealed envelope. "Telegram from Carson City, Doc. Came in marked urgent." Eleanor broke the seal, scanning the contents with increasing concern. "The State Medical Board is coming next week." She looked up, stunned. "They're conducting an official review of my qualifications and practice." Mary's brow furrowed. "Can they do that after all this time?" "They can," Eleanor confirmed grimly. "Someone's filed a formal complaint questioning my fitness to practice without male supervision." "Who would do such a thing?" Mary's indignation mirrored Eleanor's own confusion. The messenger cleared his throat uncomfortably. "If it helps, Doc, there was talk at the telegraph office. Harlan Exeter was sending wires to Carson City last week when he came through town." Exeter, Jackson's mining rival, whose operation had contaminated Willow Creek's water supply during the epidemic. The connection clicked instantly. Exeter had lost significant business to Silver Bend since the railroad completion, and everyone knew of Jackson's partnership with Eleanor. A strike against her was, indirectly, a strike against him. "Thank you," Eleanor said, pressing a coin into the messenger's hand. "Please don't mention this to anyone else." After he departed, Mary's expression hardened with determination. "We'll fight this. The whole town will stand behind you." "This isn't the town's battle," Eleanor replied, though gratitude for Mary's loyalty warmed her. "I'll need to prepare my case professionally. Patient records, treatment outcomes, financial documentation." "And Mr. Callahan? Will you tell him?" Eleanor hesitated. Jackson had departed 3 days earlier for mining business in Denver, expected back tomorrow. When he returns, no sense troubling him when he can't yet help. The week passed in a flurry of preparation. Eleanor reviewed cases, organized records, and wrote detailed explanations of procedures she'd pioneered in the frontier setting. Mary interviewed former patients, collecting testimonials about lives saved through Eleanor's care. Jackson returned as scheduled, but found Eleanor too preoccupied for the conversation he'd clearly planned. His expression when she explained the investigation shifted from surprise to controlled anger. "Exeter," he confirmed grimly. "I've heard whispers he's angling for an appointment to the Territorial Medical Commission." Eleanor paced her office, frustration evident in each step. "This isn't just about me. If they revoke my authority, the clinic might close entirely. Willow Creek would be left without proper medical care again." "That won't happen," Jackson stated with absolute certainty. "We'll fight this together." "No." Eleanor stopped pacing, facing him directly. "I need to handle this myself. My credentials, my practice, my battle." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, hurt, perhaps, or concern, before understanding replaced it. "Of course, but know that every resource I have is at your disposal should you need it." His restraint, his respect for her autonomy, struck Eleanor deeply. Any other man might have insisted on taking charge, on protecting her. Jackson simply offered support while acknowledging her capability. The day the medical board arrived, Willow Creek presented its best face. Streets had been swept clean, buildings freshly painted. The clinic gleamed with polish and order, each instrument arranged perfectly, each record meticulously prepared. The commissioners, 3 gray-haired men in formal suits, entered with the solemn gravity of judges. Dr. Harrington, their leader, introduced himself with cool professionalism. "We'll observe procedures, review records, and interview patients," he explained. "Our evaluation will determine whether your practice meets territorial standards." Eleanor nodded calmly, though her heart raced beneath her crisp white apron. "You'll find everything in order, gentlemen. Shall we begin?" For 2 days, the commissioners scrutinized every aspect of her practice. They watched her set a child's broken arm, questioned her treatment of minors' respiratory ailments, and examined her surgical records with skeptical thoroughness. On the morning of the 3rd day, as Eleanor demonstrated sterilization techniques, an unexpected commotion erupted outside. Through the window, she glimpsed a crowd gathering in the street, not hostile, but purposeful. At their center stood Mary Daniels, organizing people into an orderly line. Dr. Harrington frowned. "What's happening out there?" Before Eleanor could respond, Mary entered, her expression determinedly respectful. "Begging your pardon, doctors, but the people of Willow Creek request an audience with the commission. They understand you're evaluating Dr. Blackwood's practice and wish to provide relevant testimony." The commissioners exchanged glances. "This is highly irregular," Harrington began. "Exactly." Jackson helped stabilize Flynn as the wagon jolted over a rut. "That's why I'm here, not just for your safety, but because the town needs to see solidarity among its leaders right now." Leaders. The word struck Eleanor oddly. When had she become a town leader rather than an outsider fighting for acceptance? The transformation had occurred so gradually she'd barely noticed. At the clinic, Mary had already prepared the surgical room, its white surfaces gleaming in lamplight. Eleanor worked with focused intensity, repairing damaged blood vessels and tissue while Jackson assisted, handing instruments and managing lighting with surprising competence. "Where did you learn surgical assisting?" she asked, during a brief pause to check the patient's pulse. "Chicago, after the cholera epidemic," he replied. "Spent 2 months volunteering at County Hospital. Thought understanding medicine might help. Prevent another tragedy like my family suffered." The revelation of this unknown chapter in his life struck Eleanor deeply. Jackson Callahan contained more layers than she'd realized, even after months of growing closeness. Dawn found them still working, Eleanor completing careful sutures while Jackson monitored Flynn's breathing. The door opened quietly to admit Sheriff Davis, his expression grave beneath his sweating brow. "How's the patient?" "Stable for now," Eleanor replied without looking up. "Whether he survives depends on infection risk and how well his liver heals." The sheriff nodded, then cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Got another situation brewing. Reed and some of the local miners are talking about running the railroad workers out of town. Railroad boss Heaton's threatening to pull the whole operation if they try." Jackson straightened, instantly alert. "That would cripple Willow Creek's growth. The spur line's essential for getting ore to market more efficiently." "I know that, you know that," the sheriff agreed. "But folks ain't thinking clearly. Heat's got everyone on edge, and now blood's been spilled." Eleanor tied off her final suture, considering the implications. The clinic needed the business the railroad brought. The town needed the transportation. But most importantly, people on both sides needed leadership that valued all lives equally. "Where are they gathering?" she asked, washing blood from her. "Ann's Town Square. Mayor called an emergency meeting, but it's looking more like a confrontation." Eleanor dried her hands decisively. "Mary can monitor the patient. We should go." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "We? The town needs to see that its doctor treats everyone, regardless of which side of the tracks they're from." She met his gaze steadily. "And it needs to see that its most influential businessman values progress over prejudice." Together they walked toward the town square, the rising sun already promising another scorching day. A crowd had gathered. Miners and townspeople on one side, railroad workers on the other, with Mayor Wickfield ineffectually trying to maintain order from the gazebo between them. Eleanor surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. Men on both sides clutched makeshift weapons, pickaxes, shovels, lengths of chain. The tension was palpable, a powder keg needing only a spark. "Follow my lead," she murmured to Jackson, then strode directly into the open space between the factions. "Mr. Flynn is stable," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "With proper care, he should recover completely." A murmur ran through the railroad workers, relief mingled with surprise. "What about justice for Jeff Simmons?" "Burton," Reed shouted. "That railroader gutted him like a fish." "Jeff drew first," countered a railroad worker. "Flynn defended himself." The argument escalated instantly, voices rising in angry counterpoint. Eleanor raised her hand for silence, her blood-stained apron lending her unexpected authority. "I've spent the night trying to save a man's life, while you've all been stoking anger and division," she said sharply. "Let me be perfectly clear. As your doctor, I don't care who arrived first in Willow Creek, who works which job, or who started what fight. When you're bleeding on my table, you're simply a human being in need of care." Jackson stepped forward to stand beside her. "The railroad brings opportunity for everyone," he added. "Silver Bend ore travels east, supplies come west, and commerce grows. But that only works if we recognize our shared interests." "Easy for you to say from your big house on the hill," sneered a railroad worker. "You ain't scratching for pennies like us." "I started with nothing but a played-out claim and borrowed tools," Jackson replied evenly. "Built Silver Bend through fair treatment of workers and reinvestment in the community. The railroad can do the same." He turned to address the rail company. "Representative Heaton, you need to address the wage discrepancies immediately. These men deserve fair compensation." The railroad manager sputtered indignantly. "Company policy can be amended," Jackson interrupted firmly. "Or Silver Bend can find another way to transport its ore. Your choice." Eleanor watched this negotiation with growing admiration. Jackson was leveraging his position as the railroad's biggest potential customer to force concessions for the workers, a strategic brilliance she hadn't anticipated. "And you," Jackson continued, addressing the miners, "need to recognize that growth means change. New people bring new ideas, new opportunities. Fighting them hurts everyone, including yourselves. Burton Reed spat contemptuously. "Big words from a man who owns half the town." "I don't own Willow Creek," Jackson corrected. "I invest in it. In its buildings, its businesses," his eyes met Eleanor's, "its people." Something in his tone silenced. Even Reed. The tension in the square noticeably eased as men on both sides absorbed his words. Mayor Wickfield, sensing opportunity, finally found his voice. "I propose a town meeting, a proper one this evening, to discuss fair employment practices and community integration, with cooler heads prevailing." Reluctant nods passed through both groups. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Eleanor felt the weight of exhaustion descend. She'd operated through the night, navigated a potentially violent confrontation, and still faced a day of regular patience. "You should rest," Jackson said quietly, noting her fatigue. "So should you." She managed a tired smile. "But I suspect neither of us will." He walked her back toward the clinic, their steps synchronized by long habit. The town stirred around them, shopkeepers opening for business, children running errands, life continuing despite the night's tensions. "That was well handled," Eleanor observed, using Silverbend's shipping needs as leverage. "Just business," he replied modestly, "finding the pressure point that motivates change." "No," she disagreed. "It was leadership, the kind that sees beyond immediate advantages to long-term community welfare." Jackson stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Around them, the town bustled with morning activity, yet they stood in a pocket of stillness, as if time had momentarily paused. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. "For months now, actually. Each time, circumstances intervene." Eleanor felt her heart quicken despite her exhaustion. "Perhaps that's the nature of our lives, crisis and interruption." "Perhaps," he agreed, "or perhaps we've been waiting for the right moment." His hand found hers, warm and steady. "I believe this is it." Before he could continue, Mary Daniels appeared at the clinic door, her expression urgent. "Doctor, Mr. Flynn's taken a turn, fever's spiking." Eleanor's professional instincts overrode everything else. She squeezed Jackson's hand once before, releasing it. "We'll continue this conversation," she promised, already moving toward the clinic. "Count on it," he called after her, determination clear in his voice. Post-surgical infection, the battle Eleanor dreaded most. As she hastened to her patient's side, she couldn't help wondering if fate itself conspired to keep her and Jackson dancing around the unspoken feelings between them. Yet something had changed today. In the charged space between opposing factions, standing shoulder to shoulder against division and violence, they demonstrated a partnership that transcended both business and romance, a shared vision for what Willow Creek could become with the right guidance. Whatever Jackson had been about to say, Eleanor realized she already knew the answer in her heart. And despite the crisis awaiting her, despite the exhaustion weighing her limbs, that knowledge filled her with unexpected strength. Willow Creek needed them both, and perhaps finally they were ready to acknowledge how much they needed each other. Summer arrived with sudden ferocity, turning Willow Creek's streets to dust and stretching the clinic's resources in unexpected ways. Heat exhaustion brought miners staggering in from poorly ventilated tunnels. Dehydrated children suffered fevers that Eleanor battled with cool compresses and careful monitoring. Even the horses suffered, requiring veterinary skills she'd acquired through necessity rather than formal training. On the hottest evening in July, Eleanor sat in her small office at the back of the clinic, windows open to catch any hint of breeze. Financial ledgers spread before her told a complicated story. The clinic succeeded medically, but struggled economically. Many patients couldn't pay with cash, offering instead eggs or firewood, labor or promises. Eleanor accepted them all, but supplies still required monetary payment. "You'll go blind squinting at those figures in this light," Jackson commented from the doorway. Rather than his usual business attire, he wore a simple white shirt, open at the collar, concession to the oppressive heat, just trying to make 2, and 2 equal 5, Eleanor replied, setting down her pencil with a sigh. The new medicines from Chicago arrived with a higher price than expected. Jackson crossed to examine the ledger, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned over the desk. Such casual contact had become commonplace since the mine rescue 3 months earlier, their relationship evolving with careful deliberation. The Silver Bend account can cover the difference, he offered. Eleanor shook her head firmly. The mine already pays for treatment of its workers. I won't ask for more. It wouldn't be asking. It would be investing in public health. No, her tone brooked no argument. This clinic must stand on its own to truly serve everyone. I'll find another solution. Jackson straightened, studying her with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. Your independence is admirable, if occasionally inconvenient, says the man who renegotiated the entire San Francisco deal because they attempted to limit his operational control, she retorted with a pointed smile. He laughed, conceding the point. Perhaps we're well matched in stubbornness. The word matched hung between them, weighted with significance. Since his return from San Francisco, they'd shared quiet dinners, long rides through the countryside, and innumerable private conversations. The town buzzed with speculation about their relationship, but neither had publicly defined what was developing between them. A knock interrupted the moment. Mary Daniels appeared, her normally composed face tight with worry. Doctor, there's trouble at the Lucky Strike. Eleanor rose immediately, recognizing the name of Willow Creek's roughest saloon. What kind of trouble? Knife fight. One dead already. Another bleeding bad. Town's on edge with all the new men the railroad brought in. Jackson reached for his hat. I'll come with you. No. Eleanor's response came sharply. The last thing we need is the town's wealthiest citizen entering a powder keg situation. Mary nodded agreement. The mood's ugly down there, Mr. Callahan. Lot of talk about rich mine owners and poor working men. Eleanor gathered her medical bag, mentally preparing for what awaited. The railroad had brought prosperity, but also social tensions, highlighting the divide between established residents and desperate newcomers seeking opportunity. At least take Tom with you, Jackson insisted, referring to Mary's husband. He's already there, Mary replied. Sent him ahead to help keep order till the doctor arrives. Eleanor squeezed Jackson's arm briefly. I'll be fine. This isn't my first saloon brawl. Outside, the night air offered no relief from the day's heat. Lanterns blazed along Main Street, illuminating clusters of tense men gathered in doorways and alleys. As Eleanor neared the Lucky Strike, the crowd thickened, voices rising in angry counterpoint. Let me through, she commanded, the authority, in her voice, opening a path more effectively than physical strength ever could. I'm the doctor. Inside the saloon, the scene confirmed her worst fears. Blood pooled on sawdust-covered floorboards near an unmoving figure already covered with a tablecloth. Nearby, a second man clutched his abdomen, crimson seeping between his fingers despite Tom Daniels' efforts to apply pressure. Sheriff Davis, newly appointed after the town outgrew its part-time marshal, struggled to maintain order as accusations flew between two distinct groups. The established miners stood together near the bar, while railroad workers and new arrivals clustered by the door. He pulled first, after your man insulted his sister. Damn newcomers taking jobs. We got a right same as anyone. Eleanor cut through the chaos with practiced efficiency, kneeling beside the wounded man. His face held the sunburned tightness of recent arrival, probably one of the hundreds who'd come seeking work on the railroad extension. Name? She asked, removing his hands to examine the wound. Flynn, he gasped. Patrick Flynn. The knife had penetrated deeply below his ribs, likely damaging the liver. Blood flowed steadily, too dark and too copious for simple pressure to staunch. I need to operate immediately, she announced, looking up at Tom. Help me get him to the clinic." "He ain't worth saving," someone shouted from the miner's side. "Killed Jeff Simmons, family man with 3 kids." Eleanor rose slowly, turning. To face the hostile crowd, she recognized the speaker, Burton Reed, foreman at one of the smaller mines, known for his quick temper. "I don't decide who's worth saving, Mr. Reed," she said evenly. "Neither do you." Reed stepped forward menacingly. "That railroad trash comes in here, takes jobs, starts fights, and needs medical attention regardless," Eleanor finished firmly. "Now stand aside or assist, but don't interfere with my patient." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, tension crackling like heat lightning. Then, unexpectedly, Councilman Sims emerged from the crowd. The dead man's uncle, Eleanor realized. "Let the doctor work," he said heavily. "Jeff's gone. No sense making it 2 deaths tonight." Coming from Willow Creek's most conservative councilman, once her staunchest opponent, the words carried particular weight. The crowd parted, allowing Tom and another man to lift Flynn onto an improvised stretcher. Outside, Eleanor was surprised to find Jackson waiting with a wagon already prepared with blankets and lanterns. Their eyes met briefly, hers questioning. "He's unapologetic. Mary sent word," he explained simply. "Thought transportation might help." They loaded Flynn carefully, Eleanor climbing in beside him to maintain pressure on the wound. As Tom took the reins, Jackson surprised her by joining her in the wagon bed. "The situation back there is volatile," he said quietly. "Railroad management has been underpaying workers, who in turn resent the established miners' better conditions, been trying to negotiate improvements, but tonight may have pushed things past talking." Eleanor nodded, understanding the larger context beyond the immediate medical crisis. This man's survival might make a difference then, if both sides see that I treat everyone equally. Those men need proper medical attention. She met his concerned gaze steadily. "Would you hesitate if it were your expertise needed?" He released her arm slowly. "At least take Wilson with you. He's our best tunneler, knows how to spot danger." "Signs!" Eleanor nodded agreement, then knelt to enter the narrow passage, acutely aware of Jackson watching her disappear into the earth. The mine's interior struck her immediately, the oppressive darkness broken only by scattered lanterns, the thick air heavy with dust and fear. 15 men occupied the space, 4 lying on makeshift pallets, the others working to prevent further collapse or drain the encroaching water. "The doctor's here," Seamus announced proudly. One of the injured men, a bearded giant whose leg bent at an unnatural angle, barked a harsh laugh. "They sent a woman. We're surely done for." "That woman," growled another miner, "is the one who saved my boy during the fever outbreak. Show some respect, O'Malley." Eleanor ignored the exchange, moving directly to the injured men. One had a severe head wound, another a crushed hand. The third suffered from a punctured lung, his breathing labored and wet. O'Malley's compound. Fracture would require surgery but could wait. She worked efficiently in the dim light, stabilizing the most critical patient, the man with the chest wound, while instructing Wilson and Seamus to prepare the others for evacuation. The waters, rising faster, McCarty reported, sloshing through ankle-deep flooding. "We've maybe an hour before it reaches these men." "Start moving them out," Eleanor ordered. "Head wound first, then the crushed hand. I need more time with this one." She nodded toward the man with the punctured lung. "He's my brother Michael," McCarty said quietly. "Will he live?" Eleanor met his desperate gaze, honestly. "If we get him out in time, yes." The evacuation began, men passing the injured through the widened shaft with careful precision. Above, she knew Jackson would be coordinating their transfer to the clinic, where Mary would have preparations well underway. Eleanor stayed with Michael McCarty, maintaining drainage from his chest, monitoring his increasingly unstable condition. By the time they prepared to move him, water lapped at the edges of his makeshift bed. "Go ahead of us," Wilson urged as the last miners evacuated. "The shaft's getting worse." "I can't leave him," Eleanor replied, helping position Michael on a narrow board for transport. "If the tube shifts during movement, he'll drown in his own blood." Outside, Jackson paced anxiously as injured miners emerged one by one. Each time he looked for Eleanor's slender form, only to be disappointed. Dawn broke over the horizon, painting the chaotic scene in pale light that revealed exhausted faces and trembling hands. "Where is she?" he demanded, as Wilson's head appeared at the shaft opening. Coming behind with the last patient, the tunneler gasped as strong hands pulled him free. "Shaft's failing, sir. Whole thing could go any minute." Jackson moved instantly toward the opening, but several miners held him back. "You can't go in, Mr. Callahan," Tom Daniels insisted. "Weight of another man might bring it down entirely." Helpless for perhaps the first time in his adult life, Jackson could only watch and wait as minutes crawled past with excruciating slowness. Inside the mine, Eleanor felt rather than heard the ominous shifting of earth around them. "We need to move faster," she urged the two miners helping transport Michael. They struggled forward, burdened by the awkward stretcher and rising water. When the first section of timber cracked overhead, Eleanor instinctively threw herself across her patient, shielding his chest and the precious drainage tube. "Leave me," Michael gasped. "Save yourselves." "Not an option," Eleanor replied firmly, adjusting the tube that kept his lung from collapsing. "Everyone gets out. Doctor's orders." They reached the shaft entrance as the second support beam gave way. Dirt and rocks showered down, filling the passage behind them. The miners lifted Michael into the narrow opening, careful not to jostle the tube Eleanor still monitored. "Steady," she called up, hearing Jackson's voice directing the men above. "Keep the board level." As Michael cleared the opening, Eleanor prepared to follow, acutely aware of the groaning timbers around her. She grasped the hand reaching down. Jackson's, she realized, and had just begun to pull herself up when the final support gave way. Jackson's grip tightened with desperate strength as the shaft collapsed around them. With one powerful heave, he pulled her clear moments before the opening vanished in a cloud of dust and debris. They fell backward onto solid ground, Eleanor landing across Jackson's chest, both gasping in the sudden sunlight. His arms encircled her instinctively, holding her with a fierceness that transcended propriety. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, words meant for her alone, despite the crowd surrounding them. Eleanor felt the thundering of his heart beneath her palms, matching the rapid pace of her own. The mask of professional detachment she maintained so carefully cracked, revealing the woman beneath, frightened, exhilarated, and suddenly crystallinely aware of what mattered most. "Not yet," she replied softly. "Though it seems the earth itself conspires to interrupt us." A ghost of a smile touched his dirt-streaked face. "Perhaps we should stop tempting fate and speak plainly before the next disaster strikes." Around them, miners celebrated the rescue, families reunited with tearful embraces, and the injured were carefully transported toward the clinic. Yet in that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, still entwined on the ground as dawn broke fully over Willow Creek. "San Francisco can wait," Jackson decided. "I find my priorities have suddenly clarified." Eleanor laughed, a release of tension, of fear, of the careful restraint she'd maintained for months. "A mine collapse will do that." He helped her to her feet, keeping her hand firmly in his as they turned toward town and the waiting patients. Eleanor felt a curious lightness despite her exhaustion. Something had shifted between them, as dramatically as the earth had shifted beneath the mine. Later she knew there would be time for words. For now, the unspoken understanding was enough. They had survived another crucible together and emerged, with something precious and unbreakable forged between them. "Doctor," Mary called, running toward them from town. "The clinic's ready for the injured." Eleanor straightened, professional responsibility reasserting itself. With one last glance at Jackson, she moved forward to meet her assistant, already cataloguing treatments and procedures needed. The crisis continued, but something fundamental had changed, the certainty that whatever challenges came next, they would face them not just as partners, but as something far more essential to each other. Spring painted Willow Creek in vibrant hues of green and gold, wildflowers carpeting the hillsides where snow had lain just weeks before. The transformation mirrored the town itself, bursting with new life, new construction, new possibilities. Brought by the railroad spur, completed ahead of schedule, Eleanor leaned against the clinic's back porch railing, watching the sunrise turn distant mountains copper. A cup of coffee cooled beside her, forgotten in her rare moment of stillness. Inside, Mary supervised the arrangement of new hospital beds that had arrived on yesterday's train. "Thought I might find you stealing a quiet moment." Jackson climbed, the steps hat in hand. "You're a difficult woman to catch these days." The railroad had brought more than supplies and commerce to Willow Creek. Prospectors, families, and fortune-seekers arrived daily, swelling the population and Eleanor's patient roster. The clinic operated from dawn to dusk, sometimes beyond. "The luxury of success," she replied, turning to face him, "though I could say the same about you. I hear you've been negotiating with the Eastern Syndicate." News travels fast. He settled beside her on the railing, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "The Silver Bend's production has attracted attention. They want to invest, modernize operations, expand the workforce. And you? What do you want?" His eyes met hers, holding a warmth that had grown increasingly familiar over the months of their partnership. "That's actually why I'm here. I leave for San Francisco tomorrow to finalize terms." "Tomorrow?" Eleanor couldn't mask her surprise. "How long will you be gone?" 3 weeks, possibly 4. He studied her face. "Unless I have a compelling reason to hurry back sooner." The invitation in his words hung between them, delicate as morning mist. Since the interrupted moment on the hillside months ago, they'd maintained their effective partnership, but carefully sidestepped anything more personal. Work always intervened, another patient, another crisis, another demand on their time and attention. Before Eleanor could respond, Mary appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Blackwood, sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Hargrove is here with little Nathan. Says he's running a fever." "I'll be right there." Eleanor straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. She turned to Jackson. "Safe travels, then. I hope the negotiations go well." He caught her hand as she moved to leave. "Eleanor, wait. What I tried to ask that day on the hill." The clinic door burst open again. "Doctor, come quick!" Tom Daniels stood there, face ashen. "There's been a cave-in at McCarty's diggings. Dozens trapped." McCarty's, the shabby operation run by Irish immigrants at the edge of town. Not one of Jackson's well-engineered mines, but a desperate venture dug by men with more determination than safety equipment. "I need my emergency bag." Eleanor was already moving. "Mary, prepare the surgical room. Tom, gather every able-bodied man with digging experience." Jackson's expression shifted instantly from frustrated suitor to commanding businessman. "I'll bring equipment and men from Silver Bend. Their shaft shoring techniques are dangerous. I warned McCarty last month. They separated without another word, each focused on the looming crisis." As Eleanor rushed toward the mine, medical bag clutched tightly, she couldn't help a fleeting thought. Would they ever find time for matters of the heart? Or would emergency always define their relationship? McCarty's diggings was chaos when she arrived. A crowd had gathered around the mine entrance, where a partial collapse blocked access to the men trapped inside. Women wailed, children clung to their mothers' skirts, and a thin man with wild red hair shouted increasingly desperate orders. "McCarty!" Eleanor approached him directly. "Aye, that's me." His face was streaked with dirt and tears. 15 men. Down there, including my brothers. Eleanor assessed the situation with the clarity forged through multiple crises. Is there another entrance? An air shaft? The back shaft, a woman offered, stepping forward. Her simple dress and calloused hands marked her as a miner's wife. It's narrow but connects to the main tunnel. Show me, Eleanor commanded. The woman led her around the hill to a crude opening barely wide enough for a child. Eleanor knelt, feeling a faint current of air. The mine wasn't completely sealed. Hope flickered. Could someone fit through there? She asked. My boy Seamus could, the woman answered. He's 12 but small for his age, works the narrow seams. Eleanor's medical instincts rebelled at sending a child into danger, but she understood mining families' pragmatism. Before she could respond, the thunder of approaching horses announced Jackson's arrival with equipment and experienced miners. We've found a potential access point, Eleanor explained quickly. A boy could get through with medical supplies. Jackson assessed the narrow shaft with a miner's experienced eye. It's risky. That whole hillside's unstable. The air's still flowing, Eleanor countered. Those men could be dying while we debate. Their eyes met in silent communication, the calculus of risk and reward, of potential loss against certain death. Your decision, Doctor, Jackson said finally. But if you send someone in, I'm reinforcing this entrance first. While Jackson's men shored up the narrow shaft, Eleanor prepared young Seamus, explaining exactly what to look for and how to administer basic first aid. You're brave to do this, she told him, packing essentials into a small satchel he could drag behind him. My Da's down there, the boy replied simply. Within an hour they had established a crude relay system, Seamus reporting conditions through the narrow shaft, Eleanor providing medical guidance, Jackson's men working methodically to widen the opening. 4 badly hurt, Seamus called back, voice echoing eerily. Others just trapped, water rising at the far end. Eleanor and Jackson exchanged worried glances. Water meant a breached underground spring and a race against drowning as well as injury. We need to stabilize the injured before moving them, Eleanor decided. Seamus, the red packet contains bandages soaked in carbolic acid. Use them on open wounds exactly as I showed you. The next hours passed in agonizing slowness. Jackson worked alongside his men, shirt sleeves rolled up, hands bloodied from handling splintered timber. Eleanor coordinated medical preparations above ground, while guiding Seamus through emergency treatment below. By nightfall, they had widened the shaft enough for Eleanor to enter. Without hesitation, she shed her outer garments and prepared to descend. You can't go down there, Jackson protested, grasping her arm. It's still dangerously unstable. Wickfield cleared his throat uncomfortably. The meeting concerns you specifically, Doctor. A matter of some importance. Jackson stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Eleanor and the mayor. Whatever it is can wait, Harrison. As you can see, the doctor is rather occupied with saving lives. Of course, Wickfield conceded, but when things settle, the vote is important. After he departed, Eleanor raised a questioning eyebrow at Jackson. Vote? What's he talking about? Nothing that can't wait, Jackson replied, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. By dawn, the crisis had stabilized. Of 27 injured men, 25 would survive. 2 had died despite Eleanor's best efforts. 1 from catastrophic internal injuries, another from blood loss before reaching town. Eleanor stood outside the clinic in the pale morning light, snow falling gently on her upturned face. Exhaustion had pushed her beyond feeling, into a strange, detached clarity. You should rest, Jackson said, appearing beside her with a steaming cup of coffee. She accepted it gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. So should you. I'm not the one who performed surgery for 14 hours straight. Eleanor sipped the coffee, too tired to argue. What's this vote the mayor mentioned? Jackson hesitated, then sighed. The town council is considering a proposal to formally establish the clinic as Willow Creek's official medical facility with you as chief physician. Eleanor nearly dropped her cup. After all this time, they're acknowledging me officially? After the epidemic, the stagecoach rescue, and now this. He gestured toward the buildings where men rested under her care. Even the most stubborn councilmen have run out of objections, including Mayor Wickfield, especially him. His nephew was among those you saved tonight, the young man with the crushed ribs. Eleanor shook her head slowly. Politics shouldn't determine medical recognition. Perhaps not, but it's how the world works. Jackson's voice softened. Take the win, Eleanor. You've earned it many times over. 3 days later, Eleanor stood before the town council once again. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. The same room, the same skeptical faces, though perhaps with less overt hostility than before. Unlike her first appearance, however, this time, the room was packed with townspeople. Mary Daniels and her husband stood near the back. Mrs. Hargrove sat near the front, baby Nathan sleeping peacefully in her arms. Miners from Silver Bend lined the walls, their usually rowdy presence subdued with respectful attention. Mayor Wickfield called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. We are here to consider the formal establishment of the Willow Creek Medical Clinic and the appointment of its chief physician. He adjusted his spectacles importantly. Councilman, you have before you the proposal and supporting documentation. Are there any questions before we proceed to a vote? Councilman Sims raised a hand. I have reservations about setting such a precedent. A female physician saved your grandson's life during the epidemic. Mrs. Parker interjected from the audience. And delivered my sister's twins last month when they were breech. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sims subsided, though his expression remained sour. If there are no substantive objections, Mayor Wickfield continued, with a warning glance at the audience, then we shall proceed to a vote. Those in favor of establishing the clinic with Dr. Eleanor Blackwood as chief physician. 4 hands raised immediately. Sims, after a moment's hesitation and a pointed look from several miners, grudgingly added his. Unanimously approved, Wickfield announced, sounding somewhat surprised at the outcome himself. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Eleanor, standing perfectly still amid the celebration, felt a curious mix of vindication and humility. The moment she'd fought for had arrived, yet somehow it seemed less important than the journey that had brought her here. Jackson appeared at her side, his smile containing pride she'd never seen directed at her before. Congratulations, Doctor. It seems almost anticlimactic, she admitted softly, after everything else. Official recognition matters, he countered. Not just for you, but for every girl in this town who might now dream of something beyond marriage and motherhood. Eleanor glanced around at the celebrating faces, Mary Daniels beaming, Mrs. Hargrove showing her baby to admiring neighbors, young girls watching with wide, wondering eyes. When you put it that way, she conceded, perhaps it is significant. After all, as the crowd dispersed, Eleanor found herself cornered by Mayor Wickfield, his manner uncharacteristically contrite. Doctor, I hope there are no hard feelings about our previous misunderstanding. Eleanor regarded him steadily. That depends, Mayor. Will there be similar misunderstandings when the next qualified woman seeks opportunity in Willow Creek? Wickfield had the grace to look embarrassed. Progress takes time, Doctor, but I believe we've all learned a valuable lesson about judging capability based on conventional expectations. Then no hard feelings. Eleanor extended her hand, which the mayor shook somewhat stiffly. As she left the council chambers, Eleanor found Jackson waiting with his horse saddled alongside her own. I thought you might want to see something, he said cryptically. Curious, she mounted and followed him through town and up the gentle slope beyond. The snow had stopped, leaving the landscape transformed into crystalline beauty. At the crest of the hill, Jackson reined in his horse and motioned for Eleanor to look back. Below them spread Willow Creek, smoke rising from chimneys, the new clinic. Prominent at the north end, the railroad track cutting a dark line through white fields to the south. In the fading afternoon light, it looked almost magical. A frontier town remaking itself into something more substantial, more permanent. "I used to come up here when I first bought the mine," Jackson said quietly, "to remind myself what I was working for. Not just profit, but this, a community with a future." Eleanor understood suddenly that he was sharing something deeply personal, a vision that had driven him just as her medical calling had driven her. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "It's more than that now." He turned in his saddle to face her fully. "Eleanor, there's something I've been meaning to ask you since the stagecoach rescue. Something I've hesitated to broach for fear of complicating. Our professional relationship." Eleanor felt her heart quicken, both anticipating and dreading his next words. Their partnership had become something precious to her, comfortable yet challenging, respectful yet intimate in its way. "Jackson, A rider approached from town, interrupting whatever she might have said. It was one of the telegraph operators. His horse lathered despite the cold. "Mr. Callahan, doctor, urgent wire from Carson City." He thrust a yellow paper toward them. "They're asking if you can take more injured. There's been an explosion at the Comstock mines." Eleanor exchanged a quick glance with Jackson, personal matters instantly set aside. "How many injured?" "Dozens, Mom. They're desperate for doctors." "Tell them yes," she said firmly. "We'll take as many as they can send. And wire Reno for additional medical supplies. They can come on the same train." As the messenger galloped back toward town, Eleanor turned to Jackson. "Whatever you were going to say, we'll keep," he finished, though something like regret flickered in his eyes. "There are lives at stake." Eleanor nodded, already mentally preparing for the influx of injured miners. "After this crisis passes..." "After." He agreed, a promise in the single word. Together, they rode back toward town, toward the clinic that symbolized both their partnership and the community's evolution. Whatever lay between them personally would wait, as it had waited through epidemic and accident, construction and confrontation. For now, there was work to do, the work that had brought Eleanor to Willow Creek, the work that had revealed her true character to a skeptical town, the work that had forged an unlikely bond with the man riding beside her, and perhaps that work, that shared purpose, was the truest foundation for whatever might come next. Eleanor hadn't realized he was watching. Something in his expression, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, made her look away quickly. "We need to get them to town," she said, "all business again. The mother and baby require constant monitoring. The elderly man, too." Callahan nodded. "I've sent 2 men back for a wagon. Should be here soon." While they waited, Eleanor checked each patient again, giving instructions for their immediate care once they reached town. The elderly man would recover with proper rest. The premature infant remained the greatest concern. "You should prepare them," Callahan said softly as they stood apart from the others. "The baby may not survive the journey," Eleanor finished, her professional mask slipping momentarily. "I know, but I've seen miracles before, Mr. Callahan." "Jackson," he corrected gently. "After today, I think we're well past formalities, Eleanor." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it startled her, more so because it felt natural, earned in the crucible of shared crisis. "Perhaps we are. Jackson." The wagon arrived as afternoon shadows lengthened. They carefully transferred the patients, creating a nest of blankets for the mother and infant, securing the elderly man to prevent movement during the journey. Eleanor insisted on riding in the wagon. bed, monitoring her patients. Callahan rode alongside, occasionally passing water or supplies through the canvas covering. By the time they reached Willow Creek, word of the accident had spread. A crowd gathered as the wagon rolled down Main Street. To Eleanor's surprise, women stepped forward immediately, offering assistance, clean linens, broth for the injured. "Take the mother and baby to my cabin," Eleanor directed. "It's closest, and I have a proper examination table. The old gentleman can recover at my house," offered Mrs. Parker, wife of the young councilman. "We have a ground-floor guest room, plenty of help." Eleanor blinked at this unexpected cooperation. These were the same respectable women who had shunned her upon arrival. Now they organized themselves with efficiency, following her medical directions without question. "The epidemic changed things," Callahan murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "Nothing reveals character like crisis." For 3 days, Eleanor barely left her cabin, tending to the premature infant whose tiny life hung by a thread. The mother, recovering well physically, remained distraught, fearing each hour would be her son's last. On the 3rd night, as Eleanor dozed in a chair beside the makeshift crib, a dresser drawer lined with soft flannel, a gentle knock roused her. "Jackson." Callahan entered, carrying a wooden box. "Thought you could use this," he said, setting it beside her. Inside the box lay an odd contraption of copper and glass. "What is it?" "Called an infant incubator. Saw one in Chicago last year at a medical exhibit. Had my engineers recreate it. From memory. Keeps the baby warm, helps regulate temperature." Eleanor stared at him, then at the device. "You built this in 3 days?" "My men did. Said it was the most important thing they'd ever made." He knelt beside the drawer crib, his large hand hovering briefly over the tiny infant. "How is he?" "Fighting." Eleanor carefully lifted the baby, placing him in the incubator's warm embrace. This could make all the difference. They worked together, adjusting the device, watching as the baby's breathing seemed to ease in the regulated warmth. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming softly against the cabin roof. "You should rest," Callahan said, noticing how Eleanor swayed with exhaustion. "I can watch for a while." A mining magnate monitoring a premature infant? Her attempt at lightness faltered as fatigue overcame her. "I've overseen more delicate operations." He guided her to the small cot in the corner. "Sleep, Eleanor. Doctor's orders." Too weary to protest, she sank onto the cot. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt a blanket being tucked around her shoulders, gentle as a promise. She woke hours later to sunlight streaming through the windows and the mother's quiet voice singing a lullaby. The baby, still in the incubator, had more color than before, his tiny chest rising and falling with stronger purpose. Callahan was gone, but a note lay on her table. "Progress on Clinic Foundation begins today. Come when you can. Jay." When Eleanor finally visited the clinic site 2 days later, she found not just the contracted workers, but a dozen Silver Bend miners digging the foundation trench. The town carpenter measured boards for framing, while the blacksmith forged specialized brackets for the roof. "What's all this?" she asked, astonished. "Volunteers," Callahan explained, appearing beside her. "Seems folks are eager to see this clinic built before winter." Eleanor recognized faces among the workers. Men whose children she'd treated during the epidemic, husbands of women she'd helped through difficult births. Even Councilman Parker wielded a shovel alongside miners and merchants. Word about the stagecoach rescue spread, Callahan continued. The baby holding on, the mother recovering. People are calling it a miracle. "Science and medicine, not miracles," Eleanor corrected automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps, but whatever you call it, this town has finally recognized what I saw the moment you faced down the council. You belong here, Eleanor. Not despite their initial rejection, but because of how you responded to it." She watched the men working together. Townspeople, and miners, merchants, and laborers, united in common purpose. A sudden lump formed in her throat. I had almost given up, she admitted quietly. That first week after the council meeting, I was ready to leave. What made you stay? Eleanor thought of Timmy Mason's broken arm, of the epidemic victims, of the tiny fighter in the incubator. There was always one more patient who needed me, one more chance to prove myself. Callahan's hand found hers, a brief touch that conveyed more than words. And now? She surveyed the foundation taking shape, mentally adding the walls, the windows, the rooms where she would practice the medicine she'd trained so hard to master. Now, she said, squeezing his hand once before releasing it, I believe I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Eleanor hadn't realized he was watching. Something in his expression, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, made her look away quickly. We need to get them to town, she said, all business again. The mother and baby require constant monitoring. The elderly man too. Callahan nodded. I've sent 2 men back for a wagon. Should be here soon. While they waited, Eleanor checked each patient again, giving instructions for their immediate care once they reached town. The elderly man would recover with proper rest. The premature infant remained the greatest concern. You should prepare them, Callahan said softly as they stood apart from the others. The baby may not survive the journey, Eleanor finished, her professional mask slipping momentarily. I know, but I've seen miracles before, Mr. Callahan. Jackson, he corrected gently. After today, I think we're well past formalities, Eleanor. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it startled her, more so because it felt natural, earned in the crucible of shared crisis. Perhaps we are. Jackson. The wagon arrived as afternoon shadows lengthened. They carefully transferred the patients, creating a nest of blankets for the mother and infant, securing the elderly man to prevent movement during the journey. Eleanor insisted on riding in the wagon, bed, monitoring her patients. Callahan rode alongside, occasionally passing water or supplies through the canvas covering. By the time they reached Willow Creek, word of the accident had spread. A crowd gathered as the wagon rolled down Main Street. To Eleanor's surprise, women stepped forward immediately, offering assistance, clean linens, broth for the injured. Take the mother and baby to my cabin, Eleanor directed. It's closest, and I have a proper examination table. The old gentleman can recover at my house, offered Mrs. Parker, wife of the young councilman. We have a ground-floor guest room, plenty of help. Eleanor blinked at this unexpected cooperation. These were the same respectable women who had shunned her upon arrival. Now they organized themselves with efficiency, following her medical directions without question. The epidemic changed things, Callahan murmured, as if reading her thoughts. Nothing reveals character like crisis. For 3 days, Eleanor barely left her cabin, tending to the premature infant, whose tiny life hung by a thread. The mother, recovering well physically, remained distraught, fearing each hour would be her son's last. On the 3rd night, as Eleanor dozed in a chair beside the makeshift crib, a dresser drawer lined with soft flannel, a gentle knock roused her. Jackson. Callahan entered, carrying a wooden box. Thought you could use this, he said, setting it beside her. Inside the box lay an odd contraption of copper and glass. What is it? Called an infant incubator. Saw one in Chicago last year at a medical exhibit. Had my engineers recreate it? From memory. Keeps the baby warm, helps regulate temperature. Eleanor stared at him, then at the device. You built this in 3 days? My men did. Said it was the most important thing they'd ever made. He knelt beside the drawer crib, his large hand hovering briefly over the tiny infant. How is he? Fighting. Eleanor carefully lifted the baby, placing him in the incubator's warm embrace. This could make all the difference. They worked together, adjusting the device, watching as the baby's breathing seemed to ease in the regulated Warmth. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming softly against the cabin roof. "You should rest," Callahan said, noticing how Eleanor swayed with exhaustion. "I can watch for a while." A mining magnate monitoring a premature infant. Her attempt at lightness faltered as fatigue overcame her. "I've overseen more delicate operations." He guided her to the small cot in the corner. "Sleep, Eleanor. Doctor's orders." Too weary to protest, she sank onto the cot. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt a blanket being tucked around her shoulders, gentle as a promise. She woke hours later to sunlight streaming through the windows and the mother's quiet voice singing a lullaby. The baby, still in the incubator, had more color than before, his tiny chest rising and falling with stronger purpose. Callahan was gone, but a note lay on her table. "Progress on clinic foundation begins today. Come when you can. Jay." When Eleanor finally visited the clinic site 2 days later, she found not just the contracted workers, but a dozen Silver Bend miners digging the foundation trench. The town carpenter measured boards for framing, while the blacksmith forged specialized brackets for the roof. "What's all this?" she asked, astonished. "Volunteers," Callahan explained, appearing beside her. "Seems folks are eager to see this clinic built before winter." Eleanor recognized faces among the workers, men whose children she'd treated during the epidemic, husbands of women she'd helped through difficult births. Even Councilman Parker wielded a shovel alongside miners and merchants. "Word about the stagecoach rescue spread," Callahan continued. "The baby holding on, the mother recovering. People are calling it a miracle." "Science and medicine, not miracles," Eleanor corrected automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps. But whatever you call it, this town has finally recognized what I saw the moment you faced down the council. You belong here, Eleanor, not despite their initial rejection, but because of how you responded to it." She watched the men working together, townspeople, and miners, merchants and laborers, united in common purpose. A sudden lump formed in her throat. "I had almost given up," she admitted quietly. "That first week after the council meeting, I was ready to leave." "What made you stay?" Eleanor thought of Timmy Mason's broken arm, of the epidemic victims, of the tiny fighter in the incubator. "There was always one more patient who needed me, one more chance to prove myself." Callahan's hand found hers, a brief touch that conveyed more than words. And now, she surveyed the foundation taking shape, mentally adding the walls, the windows, the rooms where she would practice the medicine she'd trained so hard to master. "Now," she said, squeezing his hand once before releasing it, "I believe I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." 3 weeks after the fever broke, Eleanor stood in an empty lot at the north end of town, Jackson Callahan's architect beside her unrolling blueprints across a makeshift table. The morning sun cast long shadows as townspeople passed by, nodding, or tipping hats, acknowledgements unimaginable just a month earlier. "Southern exposure for the recovery ward," Eleanor pointed to the drawings. "Patients heal faster with natural light." The architect, a precise man from San Francisco, made notations with quick, efficient strokes. "And the surgical theater?" "Northern light, steady, without glare." Eleanor traced the outline with her finger. "Windows high enough for privacy, but sufficient for illumination." Callahan approached, dust from the mine still clinging to his boots. He'd taken to visiting the Silver Bend daily since the epidemic, implementing improved safety and sanitation measures. "How goes the planning, Doc?" he asked, studying the blueprints over her shoulder. His nearness still unsettled her, though. She'd grown accustomed to his directness. "We've resolved the layout. Mr. Palmer has quite brilliantly incorporated my requirements while maintaining structural integrity." "She drives a hard bargain," Palmer admitted with professional respect, "demanding the best ventilation system this side of Chicago. Good air circulation prevents contagion, Eleanor replied, unapologetic. I won't build a clinic that causes more illness than it cures. Callahan nodded approvingly. When can you start construction? Materials arrive next week. With good weather, we'll have the foundation laid before the first snow. Palmer rolled up the blueprints with practiced efficiency. Excuse me, I need to consult with the foreman. As the architect departed, Eleanor surveyed the empty lot, transforming it, in her mind's eye, into the facility she'd dreamed of since medical school. No more makeshift treatments on kitchen tables or delivering babies by lantern light. Having second thoughts? Callahan asked, misinterpreting her silence. Quite the opposite. She turned to face him. I'm wondering if I've been ambitious enough. The mining population is growing, and with the railroad spur coming through next spring, always thinking ahead. A smile touched his eyes. That's why this partnership works. Speaking of partnerships, Eleanor began hesitantly, there's something I've been meaning to discuss. Before she could continue, a shout interrupted them. A ranch hand galloped down the street, pulling his horse to a rearing halt before them. Doc! Mr. Callahan! Stage crashed 3 miles out, ravine by Eagle Point. The young man's face was flushed with exertion. Driver's dead. Passengers hurt bad. Callahan reacted instantly, whistling for his horse, while Eleanor ran toward her cabin for her medical bag. Minutes later, they thundered out of town, the ranch hand leading 3 other riders toward the crash site. The scene when they arrived stole Eleanor's breath. The stagecoach lay shattered at the bottom of a steep ravine, one wheel still spinning lazily. Luggage and mailbags had spilled across the rocky ground. Near the wreckage, 2 men had dragged injured passengers to level ground. Eleanor slid from her horse and scrambled down the slope. Medical bag clutched tightly. 4 passengers, a well-dressed couple, an elderly man, and a young woman, lay in various states of distress. The driver never saw the washout, one of the men explained, his voice shaking. Horse broke its leg, coach went over. Eleanor nodded grimly, already examining the elderly man, whose labored breathing concerned her most. His pulse fluttered weakly beneath her fingers, ribs clearly broken beneath his blood-soaked shirt. Punctured lung, she murmured, reaching for her instruments. I need clean cloth, water if you have it. Callahan was already beside her, offering his canteen and silk handkerchief. What can I do? Stabilize his head while I insert the chest tube. She worked with swift precision, cutting away cloth, sterilizing her instruments with alcohol from her bag. The old man groaned as she made a small incision between his ribs. The well-dressed woman screamed suddenly, clutching her abdomen. My baby! Please! My baby's coming! Eleanor froze momentarily, calculating impossible mathematics. 1 doctor, 4 patients, a woman in labor, a dying old man. Go to her, Callahan said quietly, his hands steady where they supported the elderly man's head. Tell me what to do here, and I'll manage. Eleanor met his eyes, saw the calm resolve there, and made her decision. Quickly she guided his hand to apply pressure around the chest tube. Hold this exactly as I show you. If blood bubbles through, tilt him slightly to this side. Don't let him move. She squeezed his arm once before moving to the pregnant woman. Time blurred as Eleanor worked between patients. The elderly man stabilized under Callahan's care. The husband had suffered only minor injuries. The young woman passenger had a broken arm that Eleanor set and splinted. The pregnant woman's labor progressed rapidly, too rapidly for a first birth. When Eleanor examined her more thoroughly, she understood why. How far along are you? She asked gently. 7 months, the woman gasped between contractions. We were traveling to my sister's in Virginia City. The doctor in Sacramento said the mountain air might help my condition. Eleanor's heart sank. Premature labor, likely triggered by the accident's trauma. Out here, with minimal supplies, the chances for mother and child were grim. Listen to me, Eleanor said, taking the woman's trembling hands in her own. Your baby is coming now. I need you to be very brave and do exactly as I say." The woman nodded tearfully, her husband kneeling beside her, face pale with fear. Eleanor organized the men to create a sheltered area with canvas from the wrecked coach. Callahan built a small fire, heating water in a dented pot salvaged from luggage. As the sun climbed higher, Eleanor fought one of the hardest battles of her medical career. The baby, a tiny boy, arrived blue and silent, while the mother sobbed. In her husband's arms, Eleanor worked desperately over the infant, clearing his airways, rubbing his chest, wrapping him in her own shawl. "Come on," she whispered fiercely. "Fight!" Just when she thought all was lost, the baby gave a weak, mewling cry. Eleanor exhaled shakily, feeling tears prick behind her eyes. Carefully, she placed the swaddled infant in his mother's arms. "He's very fragile," she cautioned, "but he's a fighter." "Like his doctor," Callahan said quietly behind her. The schoolhouse transformed into a hospital within hours. Silver Bend miners carried in cots while their wives brought clean linens and cooking pots. Even those who had previously shunned Eleanor now brought the sick to her door. Desperation, overwhelming prejudice. Eleanor moved between beds, checking symptoms, administering medicine, and issuing instructions to her makeshift nursing staff, a collection of miners' wives and saloon girls who had volunteered when respectable women hesitated. In the corner, a woman sobbed quietly beside the still form of her child, the epidemic's fourth victim. "Doctor." A young miner's wife approached timidly, offering a cup of steaming coffee. "You ain't sat down since yesterday." Eleanor accepted the cup gratefully, realizing with surprise that the sun was rising again. She'd worked through the night without noticing. "Thank you, Mrs. Daniels, Mary Daniels." The woman nodded toward a burly miner tending a feverish child. "That's my Tom and our boy Elijah." Eleanor recognized the man. He'd been among those who'd muttered disapproval when she first arrived in town. Now he gently wiped his son's brow, with a tenderness that belied his rough appearance. "Your husband is a good father," Eleanor offered. "He's a stubborn man, Doctor. Most here are. But when a child's life is at stake—" Mary shrugged. "Pride gets put aside mighty quick." A commotion at the door interrupted them. Several miners carried in a stretcher bearing a young woman whose skin had taken on the telltale yellow tinge. Jackson Callahan followed, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "Found her at the Exeter camp," he explained, as they transferred the unconscious woman to an empty cot. "Their doctor abandoned them 2 days ago, took the company payroll with him." Eleanor examined the woman quickly. "Advanced stage. How many more like her?" 12 still living. We're bringing them all in." Callahan's jaw tightened. Exeter management fled with the doctor, left their workers to fend for themselves. Eleanor thought of the rival mining company. Owner Callahan had mentioned at the council meeting, "Your competitor doesn't share your concern for employee welfare." Harlan Exeter sees workers as replaceable parts, not people. His voice held controlled fury. "When this is over, I intend to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of operation he runs." Eleanor had no time to contemplate the business rivalries of mining magnates. The new influx of patients stretched their resources dangerously thin. She sent Mary to organize more broth and herbal remedies while she administered the last of her precious quinine to the sickest cases. "We're running out of medicine," she told Callahan quietly. "At this rate, we'll have nothing left by nightfall." He nodded grimly. "I've sent riders to Carson City and Virginia City. If the medicines exist in Nevada territory, we'll have them. That's a 2-day ride each way at best. My men know every shortcut in these mountains. They'll be back tomorrow." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but the doctor in her assessed the situation with cold reality. "We may lose many before then." Callahan studied her exhausted face. "When Did you last sleep, Doc? Sleep is a luxury we can't afford right now. Eleanor moved toward the next patient, but Callahan caught her arm. Even the finest surgical instruments need sharpening, he said softly. 4 hours. That's all I ask. There's a cot set up in the schoolmaster's office. I've arranged for Docky Miller to take a shift. Sober, I guarantee it. Eleanor started to protest, but the room chose that moment to sway alarmingly. She caught herself against a bedpost, realizing how dangerously close to collapse she was. 4 hours, she conceded reluctantly. Wake me if there's any change. The schoolmaster's office was blessedly quiet after the moans and coughs of the sick room. Eleanor sank onto the narrow cot, intending only to rest her eyes for a moment. Exhaustion claimed her instantly. She woke to the sound of angry voices. Disoriented, she glanced at the small clock on the desk. She'd slept nearly 6 hours. Guilt and alarm propelled her to her feet just as the office door burst open. Mayor Wickfield stood in the doorway, his face mottled with rage. Behind him, Callahan and Doc Miller seemed to be in the midst of a heated argument. "See here." Wickfield jabbed a finger in Eleanor's direction. "While you've been napping, more have died. Your treatments aren't working." "That's not fair, Harrison," Doc Miller protested, surprising Eleanor with his defense. "I've been following her protocols to the letter. The new cases were too far gone when they arrived." 6 more dead since dawn, Callahan added quietly. "But 17 others showing improvement, including the Peterson girl. The treatment works. We just need more time and medicine." Eleanor moved past Wickfield to the main room, assessing the situation with a physician's trained eye. The schoolhouse had taken on the atmosphere of a battlefield hospital, crowded, desperate, but oddly organized. Mary Daniels directed a team of women changing linens, while others administered broth and herbal teas to those strong enough to swallow. "The water deliveries?" Eleanor asked, kneeling beside a child whose fever seemed to have broken. "Steady since morning," Callahan replied. "Every household in town now has clean water. We've posted guards at the contaminated well to prevent use," Wickfield harumphed, "at considerable expense and disruption." "At necessary expense," Eleanor corrected, checking another patient's pulse. "And the cost of not acting would have been far higher." "The council is calling an emergency session," Wickfield announced. "Some feel this situation has gotten out of hand. A tent city of sick miners at the edge of town, our school-turned-hospital, women of questionable virtue acting as nurses." "Saving lives," Eleanor interrupted, her patience finally snapping. "While you and your council debate propriety, these women of questionable virtue have worked tirelessly beside me. Where are your respectable ladies, Mayor? Home behind locked doors, protecting their reputations while children die." A stunned silence followed her outburst. Even Callahan looked taken aback by her vehemence. Into this silence came the sound of hoofbeats, fast approaching. A moment later, a dust-covered rider burst through the doorway. The mayor found himself unceremoniously escorted outside as the schoolhouse erupted into renewed activity. Within minutes, the medicine wagon arrived, its precious cargo quickly distributed to Eleanor's waiting assistants. As the day progressed into evening, Eleanor moved from patient to patient, administering the new medicines with careful precision. The quinine and other remedies began their work, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. By midnight, more than half the patients showed signs of improvement. Eleanor stood at the schoolhouse window, watching the stars appear over the silhouette of mountains. Behind her, the sick room had grown quieter, more patients sleeping naturally, rather than in feverish delirium. "Doctor?" Mary Daniels approached, her plain face illuminated by quiet joy. Elijah's fevers broke. He asked for water, clear as day. Eleanor squeezed the woman's hand. "That's wonderful news, Mary. He'll need plenty of fluids and rest, but I believe the worst has passed for him." As Mary returned to her son's bedside, Eleanor felt a presence beside her at the window. Jackson Callahan offered a steaming cup, which she accepted gratefully. Tea this time, he said, with honey, Mary's orders. She's become quite the medical sergeant, Eleanor observed with a small smile. Necessity creates unlikely heroes. Callahan nodded toward the room where former saloon girls tended to miners' children with gentle efficiency. This epidemic has revealed the true character of Willow Creek, for better and worse. Eleanor sipped the sweet tea, letting its warmth seep into her tired bones. The council meeting postponed indefinitely. Councilman Parker's niece took a turn for the better. He informed Wickfield that any meeting questioning your authority would proceed without him. Callahan's mouth quirked. Then Sim's grandson was brought in with fever symptoms, and suddenly the emergency session seemed less urgent. Nothing like personal stake to change political perspectives, Eleanor murmured. They stood in companionable silence, watching the medical triumph unfold. Around them, the crisis wasn't over, but for the first time victory seemed possible. "I need to ask you something," Callahan said finally, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "And I need you to understand it's not charity I'm offering." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "What exactly are you offering, Mr. Callahan?" "A proper clinic for Willow Creek and the surrounding mining camps?" His eyes held that directness she'd come to recognize. "On land I own at the north end of town, built to your specifications, equipped with whatever you require." Eleanor stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Why would you do this?" "Because I've seen what proper medical care means to a community. Because I watched my father's pride and stubbornness destroy lives that could have been saved." He hesitated. "And because you've earned it, Doc, not through connections or politics, but through sheer grit and expertise." The offer was everything Eleanor had dreamed of. A real clinic. Proper equipment, legitimacy. Yet suspicion lingered. And in return, what does Jackson Callahan want for such generosity? His expression softened. "A Doctor Who medicine wagon's coming," he announced between gulps of air. "Mile out, got everything on the doctor's list and more." Relief swept through Eleanor like a physical wave. "Get me fresh boiling water and clean instruments," she ordered, professional composure returning. "And every able-bodied person who can follow directions." The schoolhouse transformed into a hospital within hours. Silver Bend miners carried in cots while their wives brought clean linens and cooking pots. Even those who had previously shunned Eleanor now brought the sick to her door. Desperation, overwhelming prejudice. Eleanor moved between beds, checking symptoms, administering medicine, and issuing instructions to her makeshift nursing staff, a collection of miners' wives and saloon girls who had volunteered when respectable women hesitated. In the corner, a woman sobbed quietly beside the still form of her child, the epidemic's fourth victim. "Doctor?" A young miner's wife approached timidly, offering a cup of steaming coffee. "You ain't sat down since yesterday." Eleanor accepted the cup gratefully, realizing with surprise that the sun was rising again. She'd worked through the night without noticing. "Thank you, Mrs. Daniels. Mary Daniels." The woman nodded toward a burly miner tending a feverish child. "That's my Tom, and our boy Elijah." Eleanor recognized the man. He'd been among those who'd muttered disapproval when she first arrived in town. Now he gently wiped his son's brow, with a tenderness that belied his rough appearance. "Your husband is a good father," Eleanor offered. "He's a stubborn man, Doctor. Most here are, but when a child's life is at stake—" Mary shrugged. "Pride gets put aside mighty quick." A commotion at the door interrupted them. Several miners carried in a stretcher bearing a young woman whose skin had taken on the telltale yellow tinge. Jackson Callahan followed, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "Found her at the Exeter camp," he explained, as they transferred the unconscious woman to an empty cot. "Their doctor abandoned them 2 days ago, took the company payroll with him." Eleanor examined the woman quickly. Advanced stage. How many more like her? 12 still living, we're bringing them all in. Callahan's jaw tightened. Exeter management fled with the doctor, left their workers to fend for themselves. Eleanor thought of the rival mining company. Owner Callahan had mentioned at the council meeting, "Your competitor doesn't share your concern for employee welfare." Harlan Exeter sees workers as replaceable parts, not people. His voice held controlled fury. "When this is over, I intend to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of operation he runs." Eleanor had no time to contemplate the business rivalries of mining magnates. The new influx of patients stretched their resources dangerously thin. She sent Mary to organize more broth and herbal remedies while she administered the last of her precious quinine to the sickest cases. "We're running out of medicine," she told Callahan quietly. "At this rate, we'll have nothing left by nightfall." He nodded grimly. "I've sent riders to Carson City and Virginia City. If the medicines exist in Nevada territory, we'll have them." "That's a 2-day ride each way at best. My men know every shortcut in these mountains. They'll be back tomorrow." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but the doctor in her assessed the situation with cold reality. "We may lose many before then." Callahan studied her exhausted face. "When did you last sleep, Doc? Sleep is a luxury we can't afford right now." Eleanor moved toward the next patient, but Callahan caught her arm. "Even the finest surgical instruments need sharpening," he said softly. 4 hours, that's all I ask. There's a cot set up in the schoolmaster's office. I've arranged for Docky Miller to take a shift, sober, I guarantee it." Eleanor started to protest, but the room chose that moment to sway alarmingly. She caught herself against a bedpost, realizing how dangerously close to collapse she was. 4 hours, she conceded reluctantly. "Wake me if there's any change." The schoolmaster's office was blessedly quiet after the moans and coughs of the sick room. Eleanor sank onto the narrow cot, intending only to rest her eyes for a moment. Exhaustion claimed her instantly. She woke to the sound of angry voices. Disoriented, she glanced at the small clock on the desk. She'd slept nearly 6 hours. Guilt and alarm propelled her to her feet just as the office door burst open. Mayor Wickfield stood in the doorway, his face mottled with rage. Behind him, Callahan and Doc Miller seemed to be in the midst of a heated argument. "See here." Wickfield jabbed a finger in Eleanor's direction. "While you've been napping, more have died. Your treatments aren't working." "That's not fair, Harrison." Doc Miller protested, surprising Eleanor with his defense. "I've been following her protocols to the letter. The new cases were too far gone when they arrived." 6 more dead since dawn," Callahan added quietly. "But 17 others showing improvement, including the Peterson girl. The treatment works. We just need more time and medicine." Eleanor moved past Wickfield to the main room, assessing the situation with a physician's trained eye. The schoolhouse had taken on the atmosphere of a battlefield hospital, crowded, desperate, but oddly organized. Mary Daniels directed a team of women changing linens, while others administered broth and herbal teas to those strong enough to swallow. "The water deliveries?" Eleanor asked, kneeling beside a child whose fever seemed to have broken. "Steady since morning," Callahan replied. "Every household in town now has clean water. We've posted guards at the contaminated well to prevent use." Wickfield harumphed. "At considerable expense and disruption." "At necessary expense," Eleanor corrected, checking another patient's pulse. "And the cost of not acting would have been far higher." "The council is calling an emergency session," Wickfield announced. "Some feel this situation has gotten out of hand. A tent city of sick miners at the edge of town, our school turned hospital. Women of questionable virtue acting as nurses." "Saving lives," Eleanor interrupted, her patience finally snapping. "While you and your council debate propriety, these women of questionable virtue have worked tirelessly beside me. Where are your respectable ladies, Mayor? Home behind locked doors, protecting their reputations while children die. A stunned silence followed her outburst. Even Callahan looked, taken aback by her vehemence. Into this silence came the sound of hoofbeats, fast approaching. A moment later, a dust-covered rider burst through the doorway. "Medicine wagon's coming," he announced between gulps of air. "Mile out. Got everything on the doctor's list and more." Relief swept through Eleanor like a physical wave. "Get me fresh. Boiling water and clean instruments," she ordered, professional composure returning, "and every able-bodied person who can follow directions." The first cases of fever appeared 3 days later. It began with the Carson twins, newborns who turned yellow and listless shortly after birth. Then Mrs. Peterson's older children fell ill, followed by the blacksmith's apprentice and 2 girls from the schoolhouse. By week's end, 17 people in Willow Creek showed symptoms of the mysterious ailment: high fever, jaundiced skin, and a racking cough that left bloody specks on handkerchiefs. Eleanor worked without rest, moving from home to home as the epidemic spread. Doc Miller, overwhelmed and out of his depth, had taken to his bed with a bottle of whiskey for company. "It's in the water," Eleanor announced to the hastily assembled town council. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally neat hair escaped its pins. "The symptoms point to a waterborne infection. The town well is contaminated." Mayor Wickfield's face reddened. "Nonsense. That well has served Willow Creek for 20 years, and now it's making people sick," Eleanor insisted. "The mining operations upriver have changed the water flow. I believe contaminated water is seeping into the aquifer." Councilman Sims scoffed openly. "More likely, it's your presence bringing bad luck to our town. Wasn't until you showed up that folks started getting sick." Angry murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd that had gathered outside the council chambers. Faces that had begun to soften toward Eleanor now hardened with suspicion. "This is absurd," Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice level. "We need to close the town well immediately and boil all drinking water. Every hour we delay puts more lives at risk." "And where exactly do you propose the town gets its water, Miss Blackwood?" the mayor demanded. "The river's 2 miles away." Before Eleanor could respond, the crowd parted, and Jackson Callahan strode into the chambers. His expression was grim as he surveyed the hostile faces. "The doctor is right about the well," he stated without preamble. "I've had my engineers test samples. It's contaminated with mine runoff from the Northwest operation, not Silver Bend," he added pointedly. "Exeter Mining Company's new dig." A shocked silence fell. Exeter was Silver Bend's chief competitor, owned by Callahan's longtime rival. "We'll need to arrange water delivery from the Eastern Spring," Callahan continued, "and establish a temporary pipeline. My men can begin work immediately." Mayor Wickfield sputtered, his authority clearly undermined. "Now see here, Callahan." 3 children died last night." Callahan cut in, his voice sharp as a blade. "How many more are you willing to sacrifice to avoid admitting a woman doctor might know what she's talking about?" The mayor flinched as if struck. Around the room, council members exchanged uneasy glances. Eleanor seized the opening. "I need a central place to treat the most serious cases. Trying to visit each home is inefficient, and it's allowing the contagion to spread." "The schoolhouse," Councilman Parker suggested quietly. He was the youngest of the council, and his own niece lay sick with the fever. Schools suspended anyway with so many children ill. "An excellent suggestion," Callahan agreed before anyone could object. "I'll have my men deliver cots and supplies within the hour." Mayor Wickfield, sensing his control of the situation slipping away, tried one last stand. "The town cannot afford—" "I'll cover the expenses," Callahan interrupted. "Consider it Silver Bend's contribution to the community." His tone left no room for argument. One by one, the council members nodded their assent, even Sims, though his expression remained sour. As the meeting dispersed, Eleanor gathered her medical bag, her mind already racing with preparations for the makeshift hospital. A hand touched her elbow. Callahan, steering her away from the dispersing crowd. "You were right about the water," he said quietly. "I should have had it tested weeks ago when you first mentioned your concerns." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "I don't recall discussing the water with you." A slight smile touched his lips. "You mentioned it to Mrs. Mason while treating her youngest. In a town this size, conversations have a way of traveling." "You've been having me watched?" Indignation colored her voice. "I keep my ear to the ground," he corrected. "There's a difference." Eleanor was too exhausted to argue the point. "Thank you for your support in there. Without it, those pompous fools would have let half the town die while debating whether a woman can possibly understand medicine." His face darkened. "I've seen what epidemics can do to mining towns. Entire communities wiped out through stubborn ignorance." Something in his tone made Eleanor study him more closely. "You've experienced this before. Central City, Colorado." 78. The words came clipped, as if extracted at great cost. "My father owned the operation there. Cholera swept through. He refused to listen to the young doctor who identified the cause. By the time the epidemic burned itself out, we'd buried 200 people, including my mother and sister." The confession hung in the air between them, unexpectedly personal. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. "I swore then that I'd never let profit or pride stand in the way of public health." He met her eyes. "You're fighting the same battle my father's doctor fought. This time, the outcome will be different." Before Eleanor could respond, a woman's desperate cry cut through the air. Down the street, Mrs. Peterson was running toward them, her face streaked with tears. "Doctor, please come quick. It's Lily. She can't breathe." Eleanor was already moving, medical bag in hand. Behind her, she heard Callahan issuing orders to his men about water delivery and hospital supplies. The town was mobilizing at last. As she raced toward the Peterson home, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. The battle against the fever had only just begun, and the outcome was far from certain. But for the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, she wasn't fighting alone. The whispers followed Eleanor like persistent shadows as she made her rounds the following week. Mothers pulled children closer when she passed. Men tipped their hats with stiff politeness that barely concealed their skepticism. But there were changes too, subtle shifts in the town's attitude since the incident at the livery stable. Mrs. Mason, grateful for her son's recovery, had become an unexpected ally. "Timmy's arm is mending beautifully, Dr. Blackwood," she announced loudly at the general store, silencing the gossiping women near the fabric bolts. "Don't know what we'd have done without your quick thinking." Such moments gave Eleanor hope, though they were far outnumbered by the slights and rejections. Still, patient by patient, she was building a practice, mostly women and children, mostly ailments other doctors might consider trivial. She treated them all with the same care she would have given in a Philadelphia hospital. One blustery afternoon, as dust devils swirled down Willow Creek's main street, the door to Eleanor's modest, cabin-turned clinic burst open. Jackson Callahan filled the doorframe, his imposing figure supporting a half-conscious man whose shirt was soaked with blood. "Mining accident," Callahan explained tersely. "Silver Bend Mine. Doc Miller's out delivering the Carson twins." Eleanor didn't waste time asking questions. "On the table," she directed, already gathering instruments and bandages. The injured miner groaned as they transferred him to her examination table. Eleanor cut away his blood-soaked shirt, revealing a deep gash across his chest and shoulder. The wound was filled with dirt and rock fragments, a deadly combination if infection set in. "Hold him down," she instructed Callahan. "This will hurt." Callahan's strong hands pressed down on the miner's shoulders as Eleanor began cleaning the wound. The man screamed, thrashing against their restraint. Outside, a small crowd had gathered at the window, watching wide-eyed as the female doctor worked. Damn fool was trying to set charges without proper bracing, Callahan muttered as Eleanor meticulously extracted debris from the wound. Cave-in caught him, threw him against the support beams. "You were there?" Eleanor asked, not looking, up from her work. Mine, my responsibility." Eleanor's hands paused momentarily, her eyes meeting his. The Silver Bend was the largest operation in the territory. Dangerous, profitable, and notorious for harsh conditions. She'd treated enough miners' wives to know the toll it took on families. So all that talk about owning half the town wasn't just bravado, she said, returning to her task. A slight smile touched his lips. "Never was one for empty words, Doc." As she worked, Eleanor noticed how steady Callahan's hands remained, even as blood soaked through to his fine shirt. Most men of his station would have sent an employee to fetch the doctor. Not personally. "Carried an injured worker for treatment. Why bring him to me?" she asked, reaching for needle and thread. "Everyone knows your influence could have summoned Doc Miller from miles away." Callahan met her eyes with that unsettling directness. "Because you're the better doctor. And down in those mines, I need the best. My men deserve nothing less." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Before she could respond, the miner stirred again, his face contorted in pain. Eleanor administered more laudanum, her movements precise, despite her racing thoughts. 2 hours later, the miner slept peacefully, his wound cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. Eleanor washed blood from her hands in a basin, while Callahan stood by the window, watching the dispersing crowd. "You've given them something to talk about," he observed. "They've had plenty to say about me already," Eleanor replied wearily, drying. Her hands on a clean towel, different kind of talk now. He turned toward her. "First a child, now a minor. You're proving yourself case by case." Eleanor studied him, trying to understand his game. "Why do you care, Mr. Callahan? What possible interest could a mining magnate have in a struggling female physician?" "Progress." The word hung between them. "This town's stuck in the past. Men like Mayor Wickfield and the council think that's how it should stay. I disagree. And I'm your instrument of progress." Her tone sharpened. "You're your own instrument. Doc, I'm just clearing some obstacles." Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows. Eleanor felt equally rattled by Callahan's presence, by his enigmatic interest in her situation. "I don't need a benefactor," she said firmly, "especially not one who expects something in return." Callahan's expression shifted, something like respect, kindling in his eyes. "Most people in this town would do just about anything for my patronage." "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed softly, "you certainly are not." A groan from the miner interrupted their standoff. Eleanor moved immediately to check on her patient, professional instincts overriding all else. "He'll need somewhere to recover," she said, checking the man's pulse. "His family lives in a one-room cabin with 3 children, Callahan supplied. "I've arranged a room at the boarding house. My foreman will come collect him when you say he's ready to be moved." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "That's thoughtful. Contrary to what you might have heard, I do look after my men." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There will be more cases like this, Doc. Mining's dangerous work. Would you consider a formal arrangement to treat my employees?" The proposal hung in the air between them. A contract with the Silver Bend mine would mean financial security, legitimacy in the eyes of the town. It would also mean being indebted to Jackson Callahan. "I'll consider it," she said carefully. He nodded, seeming to understand all she wasn't saying. "That's all I ask, for now." With that, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Outside, the light was fading, painting Willow Creek in shades of amber and gold. In the distance, She could see the head frames of the silver. Bedmine, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the dust-choked town of Willow Creek, Dr. Eleanor Blackwood stood before the town council, her medical diploma clutched in white-knuckled hands. 5 men in varying degrees of frontier finery stared back at her with expressions ranging from amusement to outright contempt. The year was 1885, and a woman doctor was about as welcome in these parts as a rattlesnake in a cradle. "Gentlemen, I assure you my credentials are impeccable," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I graduated top of my class at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania." Mayor Harrison Wickfield leaned forward, his bushy eyebrows forming a skeptical V. "Miss Blackwood—" "Doctor," she corrected firmly. "Miss," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, "Willow Creek is a respectable town with traditional values. Our citizens would not feel comfortable being treated by a woman." He said the word as if it were a regrettable condition. "Besides, Doc Miller has served this town faithfully for 30 years. Doc Miller is 78 years old and can barely see well enough to distinguish between laudanum and cough syrup," Eleanor retorted. "Last month, he prescribed horse liniment for Mrs. Peterson's infant daughter." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Town Councilman Jeremiah Sims slammed his palm on the table. "That's enough. We didn't invite you to insult our doctor. The council has made its decision. There is no position for a female physician in Willow Creek." Eleanor's chin lifted slightly, the only outward sign of her distress. 6 months of correspondence, the arduous journey west, and all her savings spent on a small cabin at the edge of town. All for nothing. "Very well," she said, tucking her diploma back into her leather satchel. "Good day, gentlemen." As the council chamber door closed behind her, Eleanor descended the steps into the bustling main street, her composure intact despite the humiliation burning inside her. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, matching the heat of her indignation. Women in calico dresses and men in dusty work clothes moved around her, some casting curious glances at the tall woman in the sensible traveling suit. She'd come too far to turn back now. If Willow Creek wouldn't accept her as their doctor officially, she would simply have to find another way. "Quite a show in there, Doc." The voice startled her. Eleanor turned to find a man leaning against a hitching post, one boot crossed over the other. His clothes were finer than most in town. A crisp white shirt under a tailored vest, dark pants, and a Stetson tipped low over his eyes. "You were eavesdropping, Mr. Callahan. Jackson Callahan." He straightened, and Eleanor realized he was taller than she'd first thought. And it's not eavesdropping when the whole town can hear old Sims bellowing like a wounded bull. His eyes were a startling blue against sun-bronzed skin, and there was something in them that made Eleanor uncomfortable. Not menace, but an unsettling perceptiveness. "Well, Mr. Callahan, as entertaining as you found my humiliation, I have more pressing matters to attend to." She moved to step around him. "Like what? Packing your bags?" His voice wasn't unkind, merely curious. "No." She stopped, turning back to face him squarely. "Like figuring out how to convince this backward town that a woman can be just as capable a physician as any man." Jackson Callahan studied her for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "I believe you might just do it too." "Your confidence is overwhelming," she replied dryly. "I'm a good judge of character, Doc, and you've got more steel in your spine than most men I know." He tipped his hat. "Willow Creek could use a little shaking up. I look forward to seeing how you manage it." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A man was running toward them, panic evident in every line of his body. "Help! Somebody help! It's Timmy Mason! He fell from the hayloft!" Without hesitation, Eleanor grabbed her medical bag and rushed forward. "Where is he?" The man skidded to a stop, glancing uncertainly between Eleanor and the onlookers gathering around them. "Sir, I am a doctor. Take me to the boy now," Eleanor commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. Still hesitating, the man looked around at the growing crowd. "For God's sake, let her help!" It was Callahan who spoke, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Unless you'd prefer to wait for old Doc Miller to finish his afternoon nap." That decided it. The man nodded and turned, leading Eleanor at a run toward the livery stable at the far end of the street. Behind her, she could hear footsteps following. Callahan and others, drawn by the drama. The livery stable was dim after the bright sunlight, the smell of hay and horses thick in the air. On the dirt floor lay a small boy, no more than 10, surrounded by stable hands and his weeping mother. "Everyone back," Eleanor ordered, kneeling beside the child. His face was pale, a trickle of blood running from his hairline. One arm was bent, at an unnatural angle. "Don't you touch my boy!" The mother's tear-streaked face contorted with anger. "Where's Doc Miller?" "Ma'am, your son needs immediate attention. I am a qualified physician." "She's right, Sarah." Callahan had appeared beside them. "Doc Miller's clear across town, and time matters with injuries like this." The woman hesitated. Then something in Callahan's steady gaze seemed to reassure her. She stepped back, wringing her hands. "Please, please help him." Eleanor didn't waste another second. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the boy's pulse, examining his pupils, assessing his breathing. The arm was a clean break, painful, but not complicated. It was the head injury that concerned her most. "He's concussed, but his vitals are strong," she announced, opening her medical bag. "I need clean water and bandages." To her surprise, Callahan was already directing the stable hands, his deep voice calm but brooking no argument. Within moments, she had what she needed. As Eleanor cleaned and dressed the head wound, then splinted the broken arm, she was aware of the silent audience watching her every move. This was her proving ground. These people didn't trust her yet, but they were willing to give her a chance in an emergency. It was a start. The boy regained consciousness as she finished setting his arm, whimpering with pain. Eleanor produced a small bottle from her bag. "This will help with the pain, but it will make him sleepy," she explained to the mother, measuring out a small dose. "The drowsiness is normal. Don't be alarmed. Keep him quiet and still. I'll come check on him this evening." The mother nodded, the hostility gone from her face. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered, as the boy swallowed the medicine. Eleanor packed her supplies with efficient movements, then stood. The crowd parted as she made her way out of the stable, blinking in the sunlight. She was halfway down the street before she realized Callahan was beside her again. "Nicely done, Doc," he said, matching his stride to hers. "It was a simple fracture and concussion. Any competent physician would have done the same." "Maybe. But not every physician would have stood their ground against a terrified mother and a hostile crowd." He paused as they reached the corner. "You made an impression today." Eleanor stopped, suddenly aware of how many eyes were still following her. "One emergency doesn't change minds, Mr. Callahan. Tomorrow they'll go right back to believing a woman has no business practicing medicine." "Perhaps," he agreed, that unsettling perceptiveness back in his eyes. "Or perhaps not. Willow Creek has seen its share of stubborn souls, but none quite like you, I'd wager." "And what makes you such an authority on the town and its people?" she challenged. Jackson Callahan's smile widened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Because, Doctor, Blackwood, I own half of it." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat again and walked away, leaving Eleanor staring after him, her medical bag clutched in suddenly unsteady hands. What kind of game was this wealthy stranger playing? And more importantly, could his influence help her establish the practice she'd dreamed of, or would it merely create another obstacle in her already difficult path? As Eleanor walked toward her small cabin at the edge of town, she couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with Jackson Callahan had somehow changed the course of her future in Willow Creek. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen.